Thank you so much for having me. I've not done a speech in a long time, so I'm very nervous and very humbled that I've been given this space to do it. Do bear with me though, because I'm very nervous. And Callum, your I was going to say song, but poetry is quite similar to songs, is very relatable with the hope and grief, and I definitely needed to hear that. So thank you for expressing yourself that way. And I want to thank the Alliance as well for allowing me to speak in this space, because I struggle sometimes to speak on my platform. And my topic is interpersonal safety. Because I've been doing Agony Autie for 3.5 years. And pride, what is pride? What is the concept of pride? Like, in 2018, I said, for me, it's choosing pride in spite of the shame that has been placed there often upon me and my son, and then fellow autistic people, neurodivergent, and people with learning disabilities that I know. Anyone who's different, they get that stigma, especially neurologically. So pride in this current climate, interpersonal safety is very important to talk about, because being proud is an act of defiance. Being proud is exposing your lived experience as an autistic person in opposition to a medical criteria that has existed for decades. We're not ripping it apart, but we are opposing elements of it. For them to say that we can't navigate social skills, or we struggle with that, I recognize that I am a very privileged autistic in that I have the capacity of verbalization. But I've seen how the DSM-5 and the model that we are up against can be used against us. And pride, yes, it's about identity.
Yeah, put my book in the bedroom.
And it's about...
Oh, thanks.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm just laughing. Sorry. Yes, it's about identity. And
awesome.
The identity. Sorry. Callum was talking and it goes over when it does that. So I'm just giggling at that. Sorry. So yeah. And the reason I was so focused on identity when I entered the world of Autistic Pride, thanks to Joseph Redford, who introduced me to it years ago, the concept of it in 2018. And basically, I have a son, and I didn't want him swallowing the narrative that I have all my life, which is that my perspective of this world is abnormal or isn't stable or isn't focused in reality, when actually autistics have been communicating in various different ways, because there is so much more communication than just this. In the DSM-5, we are socially, emotionally, and communicationally impaired. They don't even recognize the sensory issues that we face officially, that we are telling them from a lived experience. This is why pride is essential. Pride is exposure, and interpersonal safety is being aware that online, when we do open ourselves up to creating blogs, sharing our lived experiences, creating communities, coming together, interpersonal safety is still vital, because this community, whether we like it or not, is vulnerable. Why? Because it systemically and systematically and psychologically and medically has been made so, and that is the main dominant narrative. And pride meets in opposition of that in terms of we want some middle ground, we want a review, we want some say, because the spectrum autism, that identity is shared by so many, and like any community in any society, we can be vulnerable. So I guess my first bit is like, as an online blogger for 3 years, it's please practice internet awareness safety. I so admire people coming together, sharing their experiences, sharing their creativity, sharing listings, sharing their being brave enough actually to share the really, really, it's no way for me to say it, shit parts of being autistic, with that stigma of being neurologically different, of behaving differently, of communicating with passion, of getting emotional all of a sudden like I have, because that's not really appropriate all of a sudden. So that's not very stable. This is my stable, this is my norm. It's how I talk. It's how I am. But the DSM-5, this society that we look at, so this is an important distinction. The Autistic Pride movement, I see it as an identity and culture, but it has to look at civil rights or human rights, because autistic rights are not being seen as human rights. A lot of us within this community, so there's Pride, which is a day and a movement, which is when autistic advocates come together as an alliance and we speak on different topics like we have today. The community is parents, caregivers, autistics themselves, children who don't even know they're autistic yet. Yeah, that's the autistic community, and advocates within it, and activists within it, and artists within it, and people within it. Yeah, and the two are separate. And I really hope that Pride going forward is able to guide the community into looking at what are our most interpersonal safety welfare needs as a autistic pride movement, because our community has a lot of trauma, generational, yes, so social stigma, yes, but medical, yes. We have a lot of trauma, whether it's personal, and when you make the intersectionality of autism, which is denied and underrepresented within autistic advocacy movement. So again, that's separate from Pride. So there's a few things I'm talking about here. Autism is complex, and so is the movements that are around it. And in any of those movements, you need to practice interpersonal safety. So when after lockdown, you go to events, let people know where you're going, just like you would with anywhere else. Because our pride movement already is being appropriated. The civil rights element, where we are fighting to be basically seen as humans, to not have conversion therapy upon us, to not feel like we have to be molded or shaped into a certain way of being autistic. Even right now, I'm doing my best to not stim, and you can see I'm rocking and flapping, yeah? But I'm nervous and it displaces even to a stammer or a gulp or a grab or a complete little break, because I need a break, because that was like really intense. And I was supposed to start off light. Gosh, I just went in there by accident. I was supposed to start off like by showing you some of my stims, but I'll do that in a minute. Basically, we have trauma within our community, but that ableism too, and that's why this is here, because it's the charities. The charities are looking at what we are doing because they've had the opportunity and the financial ability and the infrastructure. With infrastructure, I mean office space, staff, utilization. They've had the privilege, they've had the opportunity to shape the narrative of what do autistic people need? What should we raise money for in the name of autistic people? Well, if you do some research on these charities, big ones, that I don't know if I'm legally allowed to say, and look at where those millions are going, you will not see it going into the welfare and safety and protection of autistics. You will be seeing it going into the intervention and into the research of how and why we exist and how to change or shape us or adapt us or into society, integrate us. That's not what we're asking for. Now let me give you a demonstration. So, ABA, those people are against it. And to an extent, everyone in society goes through a form of brainwashing because you have cultures, and each culture is different from time to time, place to place, and country to country, okay? So we've seen it during this pandemic how different countries face and respond to the same situation. So based on their culture, the government, their policies, and everything that led to that. And that took history and time. Culture growth. So autistic culture is still growing. And to see a charity, I'll say it, such as Ambitious About Autism, who promote ABA, which is a form of conversion therapy, which I'll explain in a minute, to see them appropriate Autistic Pride Day, which has been, this is our 15th year of trying to occupy space as autistic people, trying to occupy space as, hello, actually, I know you've got that big, thick book over there saying that basically I've got loads of deficits, but can I maybe tell you my perspective? Or will I be silenced in the justice system because I'm autistic? Will I be silenced within the education system or even excluded because I'm autistic? What about the workplace? What about accessing health? Why do so many of us have medical trauma? What about accessing mental health? Why does it always go back to correction of behavior? I'll tell you why, because conversion therapy, ABA, like Pavlov's dogs, Skinner's rats. Why do you think I have pet rats? 400 million rats and mice are killed a year because they're experimented on, mainly because they apply animal behavior on humans because they don't see us as human. They treat us as if we are mice. And I have said it for years as Agony Autie. If you look at a community down a microscope, the way that psychology has since 1943 and before, because this is when they shaped the narrative of autism. In 1943, they gave people who didn't fit the paradigm of normal a name. And they gave then another name, bipolar, and then another name, schizophrenia, and that's how you have neurodiversity. But they gave us a name. And I disassociate it because it upsets me that we are stacked against a pile of history. And to be safe within this community is to recognize that this community is vulnerable. And I was so naive in thinking, if I'm just open and honest, and I just ask, if I just, ask, then they'll listen, they'll want to change. And the type of change we're asking for is decades away, but you know what? Keep asking, it's worth asking, never stop asking. That's when it becomes a movement and not a moment. Just 1 second, am I allowed? I'm just going to look at my notes just for like 1 sec. So here, I'm just going to show you a pom-pom. Just for 1 second, interlude, ready? Right, I can't make noise at the same time as I'm trying to read. Yeah, okay. So yeah, it's like a slap in the face. It feels like a slap in the face. How long have I been talking for? Oh, by the way, I don't know how to, I've got an hour to talk, so I don't know how long I'm talking for. And I was like, oh my God, imagine if I could feel an hour. You know, because like we have only like 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional spaces, and our senses can only do certain things. But if you could feel time, if time was a physical element, some people have the ability to sense an hour or sense time, like literally to the dot. I don't have that. I wish I did, because I don't have an alarm. So my friend's going to ring me like when it's at 8:30. right? So let me know it's been half an hour. So basically, okay, when we're looking at culture and identity, intersectionality is vital, and we need to really recognise that the most vocal are the most privileged. Even if we don't feel like it, even if we're still suffering, even if we're going through horrific things, the fact that I'm allowed to say these words without repercussion, as in being arrested and imprisoned, means I have privilege, because in some places around the world, people don't have these liberties. Oh, damn it. Sorry. Oh no, my phone's not charging. 1 second. Let me see if I can just charge my phone. Just 1 sec, 1 sec. Come on, phone, you need to charge. You need to charge, you need to charge. Right. Damn it. Okay. So, what might happen is my phone is broken. So what might happen is, just to explain, Joseph, my phone is still off, which means 5 minutes. There may just have to be an interlude. Then I need to put my charger in. Then I need to turn my phone off. And then when I turn it back on, it will be charging. It's ridiculous, I know. But that's how the phone doesn't... The phone's broke. And with lockdown, there's been no way for me to fix it. So I'm so sorry. Oh, see, and this is about accessibility. I don't have the right equipment. So apologies. Okay. So with culture and identity, I kind of look at what I have done in the last 3 years, and I see sometimes how my advice has been taken literally and sometimes what it's morphed into. And I'm like, in terms of, I stressed at the time, I'm not a professional. I stressed at the time, I'm speaking from my Sarah lived experience. I stressed at the time, I'm speaking about stims which my son likes. I'm speaking about stims which I enjoy. And to my horror, I've seen a bit of like an autism pound arising and dictating what stims are. Now, this is problematic for a few reasons. It's problematic because if you don't stim in that way, yet this is a part of autistic pride culture, and you don't identify with that, you may begin to feel ostracized. And also, number 2, it's capitalist. And capitalism then dictates identity, and yada, 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 yada. So it's about finding your own way, finding your own stims. The community often asks for acceptance. I hope that, and going forward and continuing to, that the Autistic Pride Movement and Alliance continues to work to encourage the community to look at what does acceptance really mean. Because at the moment, within our community, sometimes I see that not happening within our own community, which makes it even more difficult when then you feel like you don't belong. So when I talked about stimming, I gave examples of like squishy toys and like things that I like, yeah? And then to see it being appropriated by people within academia and making it part of their ongoing support for students who are in their 20s, when I was talking about what I was doing with my son, it's ostracizing in a way that it doesn't encourage person-led interests. And isn't that what being anti-ABA is all about? That you ensure the person's interested, that they do this. This pom-pom that I'm having here, this isn't for everyone at all. No, this took me like forever to be interested in this. Like last year, there's nowhere I thought I'd make a pom-pom. But look at it, look how stimmy it is. Sorry. It makes me smile. I get, woo! So look at it, that is so stimmy. And that brings me joy. So that's not great for everyone, but that for me, I like that. and it's really good for mental health to ground. Because I'm very disassociative, and when I have trauma, which a lot of us do, I need to ground. So finding your own stims is really important. Don't get me wrong, the pom-pom doesn't always work. Because this is another thing that the community has to look at, is things like the fact that there's a lot of us with our privilege. I think a lot of us are hiding a few things. And I think we do it to try and make, this is the autistic, sorry, he's got 10% left. I'll be back on though. This is the autistic community, not the pride movement, okay? So the community at large, which involves a whole mixture of even professionals, teachers, like I said, autistic people, parents, it's an absolute myriad of people all battling to be heard, all battling to be helped, all squabbling with each other. And what's so hopeful about Pride is that, like, on this one day we kind of get together and we go against all of that. That's why the identity part is so important, but intersectionality is too. And looking at some hard truths within our community is vital. Otherwise we are being dishonest to ourselves. We do have ableism within our community, and it's not often recognized. It can be internalized ableism. It can be ableism towards other autistics. I've seen it. And I've tried to explain it in a nice way, which is this, ready? So basically, sometimes you may get overloaded by someone stimming, but I'm advocating that they can stim. So what I'm saying is that that's then for you to self-manage and find a way to maybe, if possible, put in headphones or manage the sensory overload without disciplining the person. But you can always compromise and ask. It's not about like just always having to adapt for people, because that can make you vulnerable. Okay? Because isn't your job to always have to adapt to people as an autistic? It's actually your job to be heard, which is, that's hurting me, that's why I'm putting these on. Don't just put them on and let them know. It's not about shaming them, it's about just letting them know that this for you sounds sensitive. Because people think that when we're being oversensitive about this, and to be literal, we are being oversensitive. Literally, like, our sensory system can be oversensitive, hypersensitive, or undersensitive. Usually when they go hypo, it's because we're in shutdown, because we've had the overload from sensory input. Sorry, that's just like my experience of it. But I'm gonna have a drink. What time is it? Does anyone have the time? See how much I yabber? And another stim is the olfactory system. Again, won't work for everyone. But I ground by doing this. I'm doing this because I'm a bit nervous. It's because I want to talk about medication. See, at least I can read myself. Every time I dissociate, I'm like, why have you done that? It's like, oh, because you don't talk about this part of the speech. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Also, because it's like written there that I need to talk about it. So, medication and needing help. Trigger warnings, but I'm going to go here. This community is vulnerable is not a buzzword sentence. It's a reality. This community is vulnerable to exploitation, manipulation, especially emotional. It is vulnerable to systemic exclusion. And I mean within education, I mean within society, within workplace, and within the autistic community itself. Again, autistic pride's not the same thing. Autistic community is like, whoa! Sorry, it's like, oh my God, oh my God. It's not, it doesn't feel like a safe space for me. And for people who it does, I'm so happy. But practicing interpersonal safety is remembering your boundaries, and is to look out for signs of when you are being exploited. That goes for any community. That's just online basic safety. Because exploitation doesn't just happen within our own community. It happens from our charities. They use us as tokenistic autistics. They make us feel that we should be appreciative when we go to their shows, which we've often paid our travel for ourselves, even though we don't get paid for speeches. The National Autistic Society. And then you have to reclaim it back. Then if your executive function is bad like mine, you lose the receipt. And then they don't pay you. But they do for some of the speakers on the other stage because they're not on the autistic stage. So again, it's that devaluing, it's that dehumanizing, and it happens in the charities that make money in our name. Because they, at an executive level, do not consult with what we need. And what we need is less intervention and more acceptance. Now, to go back to my example of discipline and patience, I am an impulsive person. That's why I did Agony Autie. Like, yeah, I yabber online. Yeah, I yabber online. I was going to share myself. I'm not even going to think about the consequences because it's safe. I'm just expressing myself. La, 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 la. No. That's not what happens when you become a public figure. So you need to learn patience, and you need to learn what I need to learn, not you. I need to learn. I speak in third person, so sorry, that's confusing. Patience and self-discipline, instead of someone else doing it to me like a rat, instead of someone else using methods which they derived from rats and dogs and placing it on me again and again. Why don't they find what the person loves and let that autistic person enter a flow state, as Dr. Wen Lawson would say, who's a neuroscientist, autistic, when their brain lights up because they are filled with autistic joy, as Dean Beadle, autistic speaker, would say. It is because they have found something that interests them. Mine's the pom-pom at the moment, okay? They do change. And with this, I learn patience. When I get knots in the yarn, when the yarn gets all knots in it, it gets all knotty because I'm clumsy, it takes days. It took 5 days to unknot this instead of just 2 hours. It didn't frustrate me because this is my coping mechanism. This is my stim. This is what I do to not hurt myself. This is what I do to not headbang or pick as much. And I still pick at my hairs and everything because it's really satisfying. But I'm talking about serious harm to myself. These are my coping mechanisms that I have been taught. And instead of enforcement, if they saw us as individuals, which they don't often, especially in intervention programs, they will try to apply all the same stims to you, and then we'll have people in the autistic community feeling that they're not autistic and feeling ostracized, and we could then be causing harm. So intersectionality is vital, and I keep saying that because I'm going to go into it in a minute, because I know my phone's going to go off. So I don't want to start going on about this part, because when I talk about this, I'm going to get into a real big flow state, which is just and civil rights is essential in a pride movement because of the tougher issues, which include the fact that the biggest killers of autistic people, like the biggest thing that kills us, sorry, I'm finding it difficult to say because I don't want to say it, is suicide and epileptic fits, according to studies. It's 8:30. Thank you, Susie. Thank you. Yay, 8:30. Okay, so if it goes off, remember, I will charge it and come back on. Cool, I got it. She's ringing to let me know that it's 8:30. Okay, so, I hope it is her and not like someone else who's trying to call me, and I'm just like, thanks, Susie. And it's like someone else going, pick up the phone and need to speak. Oh no, it's probably Susie. Thank you, Susie. Okay, that gave me a nice little kind of, because my head's throbbing now. It's like boom, 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 boom. Right. So safety tips. Okay, so it's knowing your boundaries. Yes, you are autistic. Yes, you have got this wall of deficits being imposed upon you. Yes, we are diverse, but for other people to be imposing on you, oh, you can't do this, you can do this, for other, where is this information coming from? It's not coming from within yourself, then you don't have control. They do. And they are telling you how to be constantly. That's a form of ABA, and it is suffocating. It is really degrading. It makes you not know how to be. It's why we mask so much. It's why we fight, fear, or fawn. And it's why those mechanisms, which I've said our community has interracial and intergenerational trauma and medical trauma, we have trauma layered upon us. Intersectionality is vital, because as a white autistic, I am privileged. Because for the colour of my skin, I will not be judged for that. If I have a meltdown, where I'm ripping out my hair and flapping my hands and screaming and expressing pain, which looks like aggression when it's painful rage, my whiteness will protect me. There will be less consequences. That is a fact. I will be stigmatized in other ways. But it is so vital to look at intersectionality, to look at what is happening to Black autistic lives, to look at what is happening to trans autistic rights right now. Literally in the UK, they're undoing laws. Right now we have a race civil rights movement where, yes, when I say disabled lives matter, Black lives matter, and when I say Black autistic lives matter, that discussion is allowed. So we need to look at within the community, this is, remember, the Alliance, Pride movement going forward, needs to look at the community, which is parents and carers and autistics themselves. We need to look at this. We need to look at racism. Yes, it exists outside, but if we're trying to build from the bottom up, then we don't need to be repeating the same atrocities that have been inflicted upon us and society at large. We want to demonstrate that we do have empathy despite what the DSM-5 says. Whether it's cognitive or emotional, you have it. Now, that doesn't mean that every autistic person isn't capable of harm. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that it is vital for us autistics to continue to look at things like racism that exists within our community. The fact that at conferences, most of the speakers are white. The fact within academia and research, as Melissa Simmons, autistic Black scholar and advocate, explained in her Unheard Voices presentation, I think it was like a few months ago, and I really implore that you watch it. I'll share it before I disappear. It's all white people dictating, white men dictating what autism is. So when we think, you know, the girls are just like smashing the glass ceiling, trying to go, hey, where's this too? When you slide the intersectionality, it becomes really dangerous. And there's things in our community like sexism, misogyny, that have not been recognized. There are things like transphobia and ageism that have not been recognized. And that doesn't make for a safe community. That makes for a community that is still forming. And like I said, I understand we have trauma, but we don't fight each other. We fight the people and the systems that put us into this situation. And by fight, I'm speaking rhetorically. I'm speaking about use your energy to write to your government, to go against the MPs, to talk to your local councillors, to talk and submit information to health boards. And this shouldn't be our job. I know it should not be autistic people's work to do this. I know it's exhausting and I know it burns us out. I know. But advocates need to be protected. So this is a civil call. And that's why Pride can elevate itself into a movement. Not yet, but we can begin to ask. And one day, in decades to come, one day our asking for this may be heard in law, in legislation. Because at the moment, autistic people, disabled people, are very vulnerable to sexual exploitation, trafficking, assault and abuse and rape. And to emotional exploitation and coercion and control. Why? Because we have social, emotional deficits, apparently. How about it that we're so trusting and that if someone says to us, I'm not going to harm you, we want you because we value you because of this, we value your words, you believe them. And that is why I'm saying interpersonal safety. It's not just about autistics attending events. It's about autistic advocates and their safety, because they are burning out and they are being exploited. And some of them are playing each other off against each other. And it is toxic. We need to move forward as a community, which is to realize that autism is diverse and varied. And this community has some issues as well as wider society. And that Black autistic voices are being denied. And that trans autistic voices are being denied. And that many autistic voices, many autistics who have no voice, who are nonverbal, who are echolalic, who speak differently, have a difference in speech. Many autistic people who are deaf, many autistic people with co-conditions, many autistic people, the intersectionality is huge. That's what I mean, that we've barely just begun our 15th year. I'm so proud to be here. I'm so proud to be here. And I'm so sorry this is heavy. But I would be lying to you if I said that being autistic in 2020 is safe. But I am still proud despite the shame that was put there. And I'm still proud despite the systemic oppression that exists. And I'm still proud despite the history of medicalization and pathologization against our type of neurology and our way of thinking, so much that they've made it so that if something bad happens to you, and I mean really bad, and you go to the system that's supposed to help you, they won't listen, because according to the book, remember my loves, the way we perceive this world is abnormal. Mental health stigmatizes. Being autistic discriminates us. Yes, reclaim it. Be proud. Show what you can do. Show your identity, but never, ever without upholding the civil human rights of the most vulnerable, the ones who are still used as guinea pigs today. And be aware, my loves, that even though the days of the 1970s research is over, people research us in different formats and different fashions. And when we are brave enough to honestly put ourselves out there for our blogs, for our material, for our work, for expressing ourselves, and for it to then be grabbed upon by the bigger systems that already oppress us, whether it's academic research, looking at us from afar, They don't need to go for an ethics board if they can watch you and take your lived experience and then present it as their own within their academy. My lived experience, my disability, my Ehlers-Danlos loss, my divorce, my pain, my heartache, which I shared in earnesty online, and that's why this is my last speech as Agony Autie, and I thank the Pride Alliance for giving me the safe space, which doesn't yet exist online individually for autistics, but together I do have hope that we will work things out. But you have to acknowledge the problems first. And yes, that we can then fight the wider systemic issues that oppress us. So, some of our most vulnerable in the community, we are bound by a word. And that word's autistic. That word, autistic, is diverse as, say, like pom-poms. They're so diverse, different shapes, different sizes, different colours, different textures, different needs, different traumas, different experiences, different personalities. So it doesn't matter if we don't all become little carbon copies of ourselves within the Autistic Identity Pride movement. I really hope we embrace diversity and not only embrace it, not only accept it, but we defend it. We defend it. We don't speak over. We don't negate. I think when you recognize your privilege, even if you don't feel like you have it, when you recognize someone else's suffering, then that can create unity. But a word of caution, emotional exploitation exists. And I've been preaching acceptance, 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 pride, acceptance, acceptance for years. And that has come at a great cost because I have accepted some things which are nothing to be fucking proud about. And they assault the community, and I'm sorry to swear, because this is why I can no longer be Agony Autie. I have been exploited, I have been abused, and I know many other advocates are going through this same process. And if we are going through it, then so are many autistics everywhere. That's why we advocate. Practicing safety is also being there for one another. It's not tearing each other apart. And I know it's not easy sometimes to break that bubble of, I'm proud, da, 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 da. I know it's not easy to break that bubble. I do that for my son, yeah? And that's what I was doing in Agony Autie for years, is I was trying to be what I would be for my son, but I can't give that anymore because he needs me. And trusting people within academia, trusting people within industries that are like, you should be grateful that you're here. That's why we're not going to pay you, but we will pay the other keynote worker, key speaker. Sorry, I'm getting my words confused. It's like, okay, that's just exploitation and tokenism, but I have to be grateful. Autistic people are doing a lot of work, and that's being unrecognized, and that's exploitation. And I want the Pride Alliance to recognize their worth. I want autistics to recognize their worth. That's what pride is. Pride is in opposition to everything I've just explained, to the oppression, to the stigma, to the vulnerability, to the manipulation. And our community will draw some very abhorrent people towards us. Yes, we experience abuse within the community, but the community needs to be aware. Okay. At the Black Lives Matter protest in Chester, they thanked the police. They thanked the police. Sorry, it's back to front. Because they knew they were in the audience, plainclothes. There was not a clothed officer in sight. And I spotted two, and I was just like, you are so undercover detectives. Because everyone was looking forward, but they were like this. Yeah, so they were there, so they thanked the police. Now, when I did Autistic Pride in 2018, that's what I mean by I hide how vulnerable this community is, because I don't want to break the illusion which the advocacy community, so remember we've got Pride Alliance, which is here. We've got advocacy, which is, hi, I'm an autistic advocate and I do this and that, yeah, which is kind of different. And then you've got the community who often watch and get information from these, because the charities over here are then appropriate. Yeah, so that's how I see the system. Chester Autistic Pride, this beautiful stitch embroidery, cross stitch embroidery was sent in and by a lovely gentleman. I'm really bad with names, so I'm so sorry, my love. I'm really sorry, I've forgotten your name. But he sent this in, I'm sorry it's back to front. Chester Autistic Pride 2018, and we had like 400, 500 people turn up, right? And we did a day where we were exploring identity. That was 2 years ago. That's when I was proud. That's when I was going, I'm going to sting dance and you're going to do it too. I was so pumped. I was meeting other autistics for the first time offline. It was just, I got swept away. I thought it was safe. But it's never completely safe, my love. And you don't recognise the work that a lot of Autistic Pride people put in to creating these events. And for our Autistic Pride, we had undercover police because there was a known threat who was attending other Autistic Prides, and I was not going to allow that person to enter mine. So the police came along because they checked him out and they saw him for what he was. So this community needs protection. And the systems, our justice systems, our police, our psychological counsellors who like to throw the DSV in fights. Don't get me wrong, there's some good psychologists out there, there really is. Psychiatrists, find me a good find me a, can I finish that sentence? Find me an autistic friendly, ethical psychiatrist. Sorry, I'm laughing because I've been through so much trauma. You know what I mean? So interpersonal safety starts with recognizing that your needs will be different from other autistic people's needs. And some people's safety may rely on oxygen equipment, may rely on medication, may rely on supervision, may rely on extra care, may rely on that help. But it should be person-led, and we should be finding a way to ensure that our most vulnerable, and that is the ones who have no voice, who have people speaking over them and throwing the DSV and 5 at them and going, oh, they're just headbanging because they're autistic. And I'm like, do you think it's got anything to do with that lights and that buzzing noise and the fact there's a driller outside? Like the environment, which I've learned from doctors and autistic friendly academics, but it's not being practiced in our schools. We're in a top-down system, and Autistic Pride is at the bottom, and I implore you to keep going towards the top, keep asking the top systems to really look at themselves and the harm that they are perpetuating and continuating on this community. And I ask the people within the autistic community, and it's very rare, I ask the advocates, and it's very rare, who are exploiting the vulnerability of this autistic community by inciting and inflaming situations when what this community needs is to heal and have peace so we can unite and move forward, that doesn't belong within autistic politics or advocacy or civil human rights. That is vigilante, and it evokes unnecessary harm upon this community. We don't need bleachers and anti-vaxxers coming after us because advocates are inciting through a troll account, come and get the autistic community, and then playing both sides. That is what I mean by this community is not safe. And the Autistic Pride Alliance needs to stay united, open, honest. 10 more minutes. You need to. You need to be honest with each other. Yes, we have trauma. Yes, we have grief. Yes, there's no help. It often feels like there's no hope. Yes, we can't sleep. Yeah, another autistic person was killed again. Yeah, excluded too, dragged off in a police car. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it outrages us. Yes, it feels like there's nothing we can do. But I'm telling you now, Autistic Pride Alliance, autistic advocates who are ethical and who look for the welfare and the humanitarian needs of all autistics. That means broaden your perspective of what autism is. Don't be so goddamn elitist. And remember that we've not even begun in representation. We've not even begun because our society is ableist, and I have been a privileged autistic. Agony Autie is big because look at me. I can talk, I can go yabba yabba yabba, I can throw in a joke. That's what they want. They want entertainment, but I'm no guinea pig. It's why I stop, it's why I resign. I'm going to be an activist when I've healed from abuse. And there are so many autistics right now being exposed to abuse. So what do we do as an alliance? If the charities are copying us, if Ambitious About Autism is appropriating autistic pride and making it about identity, then we make it about civil rights. So they can appropriate that. And they can take that, because now what we're asking for is an end of discrimination, exploitation, sexual assault, transphobia, racism, exclusion, ostracization, segregation, medicalization, suffering, trauma. And then when we go to the systems for help, they just throw that book at us. And we need to dilute it because it was written by people who are no longer here, and we have a say, and we are expressing ourselves, and we've been doing it for some time. That's what pride means to me. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for the people who have come before, who have allowed me to be here today, who have allowed me to be here. I'm standing on their shoulders. Joseph Redford introduced me to this. And they've enabled autistics everywhere to speak up and have a bit of power and a bit of control, where for centuries, if you do the history, people who are neurologically different, we haven't. So yes, Black autistic lives matter. And to anyone who's racist in the community, you better check yourself. Because the Autistic Pride Alliance, I hope, and we're not going to stand for it, are we? Autistics need to be united. Remember, acceptance is not tolerance. Acceptance is unity, and it will come in time. Thank you so much. I'm sorry it was so intense. But, yeah. And hi, Gwen. Bye, guys. I think that's everything, yeah. I'll be on Agony Autie after, I think, to say goodbye, but that was intense. I have a headache now. Like, my head's like throb, throb, throb. And already a bit of anxiety is coming, which is like, God, what did you say? Because you got really angry. I'm like, I know. But that's how you feel. It's like, yeah, I know. And it's like that's my experience, and that's the experience of the hundreds of autistics I've met, thousands, over the last 3.5 years whilst being Agony Autie, and it's been an absolute honour and privilege. But I can't do it anymore. But I will always be an activist, and I will always fight for autistic rights to be human rights, and always to be intersectional. But not as a presenter online anymore. I don't feel like it's safe. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.